Can I ask you about someone you've mentioned here now? And I'll tell you why, and it might seem a strange question. Gerry Adams comes up all the time. He comes up all the time. Of course he does. And people say, oh, well, Gerry Adams said this and Gerry Adams had this view and stuff. I have never met anybody, not a Republican, and this could just be to do with my limited circle. I've never met anybody who said, I know Gerry Adams really well. I'm always get the impression that Gerry Adams was a very aloof person. Obviously, huge talent. Obviously, seen as a great leader. I mean, and that's what people say. But when I see pictures of you, if I Google you, Gerry Adams is often at your left-hand side and you're at his right-hand side. Mm-hmm. So do you know him well?
I do know him exceptionally well. I mean, we're great friends and we'd be in contact several times a week. And, I was down to dinner in my house about a month ago. We've been on holidays together. If he's writing something, sometimes he would run it past me. If it's his fiction, for example. So Gerry Adams, to me, is one of the greatest Republicans I've ever come across. I remember I met him, first of all, 53 years ago. When he was in prison and I was in a separate case, I went over and visited him. When I became editor of Republican News back in 1975, which is 50 years ago, I asked him to begin writing a column for the paper. People don't really know Gerry Adams because he has been so demonised. So people right away have this stereotypical attitude towards him. He is an exceptionally compassionate person. He has been a force of good within the Republican movement, in my opinion. People wouldn't see that, obviously, because things happen behind the scenes. So I have great respect for Gerry Adams. I think he is extremely talented, a great individual.
As Sinn Féin publicity director, and you mentioned it in the book, your job was to defend republicanism. I have noticed something, I don't know if it was an article or a tweet or something lately, that you said some people interpret being a Republican as agreeing with absolutely everything the IRA has ever done. And you said that's not the case. So did you ever find yourself in a situation that you're defending stuff that really you just knew it was indefensible, that it was wrong?
No, I wouldn't do that. What I would do would be very careful with my words, and I would explain a situation. I would explain, if the IRA put out a statement, I would explain that statement. But, for example, there's certain things that happened during the conflict. Right back to the Bloody Friday or Le Mans or Enniskillen, unconscionable actions, which I can't defend, I won't defend, and I don't think anybody should try to defend. So what I'm saying is that even if you supported the Republican movement and the Republican struggle, that doesn't mean to say you support every single thing that happened. So, for example, disappearing people, I could never understand that. I would never have agreed with that. But these are things that happen. But in the generality of it, in my opinion, we were at our wits' end. We were at the end of our tether in places like West Belfast and poor nationalist areas. Whenever the British Army came in, we were told they came in to defend us, and within months they were firing gas into the lower falls and killing people. I witnessed that. I had friends who were burnt out of their homes. Two of my best friends were killed in the conflict. Jimmy Quigley at the age of 18, Kevin Brady in Milltown Cemetery at the Gibraltar 3 funerals. So nobody has a monopoly on suffering. And but when you listen to certain politicians, they think that they're the only ones who have suffered. They're not the only ones who suffered. We suffered for 50 years, humiliation. And that's why, by the way, it was such a difficult decision to go into Stormont, which signified, it was a symbol of our second-class citizenship. And it was a very bold step, and it was meant to build bridges with unionism.
And obviously there are people who would disagree with you very strongly, and I'm obligated to say that. Of course I
understand that. I can understand. Some of those policemen I met in Clonard had comrades who were killed by the IRA, and they were sat down and they described one of their friends, and it was really, it made, often in a struggle, in a conflict, people operate in a conflict from a fundamentalist position where all they see is a uniform, but behind that uniform there's a person, there's a family, there's a wife, there's a mother, there's siblings, and when that is explained to people, that's why I believe in literature is very powerful. I want people to read my book and say, there's certain things which you should try to avoid at all costs.
And there's mention of a subject which has come up in conversation on this podcast in recent times, and it's come up in personal conversations that I've had. And again, it's been dealt with in literature that I've read in recent past coming out of West Belfast, and that is the subject of informers. Mm-hmm. And all of the issues that brings up. I mean, you're very clear, throughout the history of Ireland, there have always been informers, and they have always been a critical part of British strategy in Ireland. And yet, when I do speak to people now, I wouldn't go as far to say sympathy, but people have perhaps a wider understanding, looking back, that people found themselves in desperate situations. Very few people were ideologically driven to become an informer.
Well, you're absolutely correct there. In fact, the former, not sure he was the head of the Special Branch, but Ian Phoenix, he was killed in the Chinook helicopter crash in the Mulligan Tower. In a book written about him, he said he had actually never come across an informer who had betrayed his side out of ideology. A lot of people were informed, they were blackmailed or bribed. A lot of them were weak people. Remember this, during the conflict, often the IRA issued amnesties for people. If you come forward now, right, come forward and say what's happened and get yourself out of the situation that you've been, implicated in. But informers, all organisations in any struggle, be it in France during the Second World War, or in Holland during the Second World War, or in other liberation struggles around the world, they don't have prisons to put people in. So the form of punishment for informers is death, not as way it's been traditionally. I mean, several times. The first time I was interned, it was a result of an informer. The second time I was interned, it was just undercover people followed me. The fourth time that I was in prison, it was a result of an informer, Sandy Lynch, who I never met, who actually never gave evidence against me during the trial, and yet I was still sentenced to 8 years. I have no love for informers, but having said that, obviously one of my novels, The Wrong Man, it's written from a sympathetic point of view of a person who is an informer. So I try to see all sides, but in a conflict where in the heat of a situation, there's very little mercy shown towards informers, and that's the way it always has been.
But you say in this book, in All the Dead Voices, that and I mean, obviously, if the IRA shoot an informer, the IRA is responsible for that.
Absolutely.
But you do say that that from the British point of view, that this is that the nationalist community are wounding itself in this manner.
Yeah, I mean, there's an old expression. What does the trees say? When the axe comes into the forest, look, the handle is one of us. It's that fact. It's very demoralising for a community whenever someone informs. And of course, if the IRA kills that person's family. There's a funeral. There's a whole fraud situation over that. I mean, one of the things which I think is quite despicable, even though my detestation of informers is on the record, and I stated that in the witness box during my trial. One of the things that I find absolutely deplorable is that some of these informers who are working for the British state actually has a duty of care towards them. But in my case, in the case of Steak Knife, whenever the IRA discovered someone was an informer, this Steak Knife double agent would go to his handlers and say, what do we do? And the message would come back, let them kill him. Even though this person thought that he or she was working for the British state, let them kill him, because they knew, first of all, the person was of no longer any use to them as an asset. And in killing him, the IRA was going to demoralise the base, was going to come under a lot of criticism, from the Catholic Church, from local people, from the SDLP, from the Irish government, from the RUC. He would say, "Oh, he wasn't an informer." That's the nature of the dirty war.